Howdy folks, welcome back to War Thunder with the mighty Jingles. Today, well, as is usual when I log into War Thunder, the first thing that I do is I check to see what events are running, and I quite like the look of this one. It's the Mozdok, I can't even pronounce that, some kind of defensive operation, Eastern Front. And I'm going to try to fly a bomber, I think a PE-2, just trying to find out. I can never remember which crew slot. I think it's around here somewhere. Ooh, I don't know, an LA-5. LA-5 would be good, but no, I'm going to fly ground attacker. Just trying to find the little buggers. No, I don't think it's this crew slot. Oh, Sturmoviks. You know, I haven't flown the Sturmovik in ages. Sturmovik it is. Let's just check. Yep, bombs and rockets. Yep. Anti-armor ammo. Shoot up some tanks with the 23mm. Right, I think we're set. Oh, now I get it. The road to Grozny. Grozny was as far east in Russia as the German forces managed to push in World War II. They never got any further east than Grozny. And so this is the defensive operation to stop the Germans from advancing east past the city of Grozny. So I'm flying the IL-2M Sturmovik, and this thing had a fearsome reputation as a tank killer. Although it's very, very difficult to determine just how effective the Sturmovik actually was in its role as a ground attack aircraft. There are no doubt that it was an effective aircraft, but was it as effective as it was claimed? Well, probably not. And that's no criticism of the Sturmovik or the men and women who flew it, or the Red Army Air Force. Everybody, the Western Allies, the Germans, the Russians, everybody exaggerated the effectiveness of their ground attack aircraft. And these exaggerations were made for all sorts of different reasons. Propaganda, obviously, being the big reason, but also because it was just difficult to conduct effective after-action battle reports. A pilot in the heat of the moment scoring hits on a tank might think that he'd knocked it out, but he may have just blown the tracks off or disabled it, and then the tank was repaired within a couple of hours and it's back in action. The Battle of Kursk, for example, the Russians claimed more enemy vehicles knocked out than the Germans actually had. But the reverse was true. The Germans also assumed that they'd knocked out more Russian vehicles than the Russians were actually fielding at the time. On the Western Front, Tempest and P-47 pilots were constantly over-exaggerating the number of targets that they'd knocked out. And a lot of the time they were just, they weren't deliberately exaggerating their scores. They were hitting targets, or thinking they were hitting targets, or landing bombs close to targets and assuming the target had been knocked out, when in fact it hadn't. At best it had only been disabled. The Sturmovik was a very, very effective ground attack aircraft. But there is no way that it achieved the kind of combat success that it was claimed. No ground attack aircraft achieved the combat success that they claimed they did. Everybody exaggerated their figures. So, how effective was the Sturmovik as a ground attacker compared to Western contemporaries like the P-47 Thunderbolt or the Tempest? Well, it's difficult to say, or to even draw direct comparisons, because unlike the Sturmovik, the Tempest and the P-47 were not designed as ground attack aircraft. The P-47 was supposed to be a high-altitude bomber escort fighter, but that role was taken over by the P-51, which had a much better range. And so the P-47 was relegated to the ground attack role. It was a similar story with the Tempest. The Tempest was supposed to be a replacement for the Spitfire, and it was a lot more powerful, but it just didn't have the Spitfire's agility. So the Spitfire kept being modified, and fresh versions of the Spitfire kept coming out, and they continued to be used in the fighter role, and the Tempest, like the P-47, ended up becoming a ground attack aircraft. The Sturmovik, on the other hand, was always supposed to be a ground attack aircraft, and was designed as such from the get-go. But the fact that it was designed as a ground attacker imposed limitations on it that aircraft like the P-47 in particular didn't have. P-47 could carry a much heavier weapons load because it wasn't weighed down. Even though it was a very big aircraft, it was also a very powerful aircraft. And it wasn't weighed down by all the armour that the Sturmovik carried. So the Sturmovik's weapons load was not actually that impressive. The weapons load I'm carrying in this Sturmovik are 4 100 kilo bombs and 8 132mm rockets, and I really struggled to get this thing off the ground in the realistic flight model. It handles very sluggishly, and you just couldn't climb to any kind of altitude carrying this kind of weapons load, not in any reasonable time frame. But air combat on the Eastern Front, unlike air combat on the Western Front, it was all about the high altitude bomber offensive. On the Eastern Front, the air battles were fought at medium to very, very low altitude, because on the Eastern Front there was no strategic bombing campaign. It was all about ground attack. It was all about supporting the troops on the ground. Red Army Aviation in particular was all about supporting the tanks and the infantry, and therefore the Luftwaffe, in response to that, fought most of their battles, again at medium to low altitude, because that's where the Russian aircraft were. The first combat use of the Sturmovik was a bit of a baptism of fire. It was thrown into action within days of Operation Barbarossa commencing in 1941. Unfortunately, the pilots had received so little training on the new aircraft that all they knew how to do was take off and land, and the ground crew didn't know how to service or rearm the aircraft. As you can imagine, they didn't do particularly well, and were reduced to 10 of their 65 original operational aircraft after just a few days of combat, largely due to the efforts of the Luftwaffe, because they just didn't have the tactics refined for flying the Sturmoviks. But as is so often the case with the Red Army, it didn't take them long to learn from their mistakes. Instead of conducting a low-level horizontal approach on the ground targets, the pilots soon learned to instead keep the target visible on the left, and then bank to the left and go into a shallow 30-degree dive in an echelon formation with a whole bunch of anything from 4 to 12 Sturmoviks repeating the same manoeuvre to keep a rolling attack going on an armoured column. Almost like what I'm doing here, but not quite. I never claimed to be any good. The main problem with the Sturmovik was that the weapons were so incredibly inaccurate. Let's see how I do here. There go the rockets. Oh, got some kills, and then drop the bombs. I'm not actually aiming the bombs, I'm just dropping them in a line along the column, and it seems to be working. Hooray! I didn't suck much. Experienced Sturmovik pilots recognised the inaccuracy, particularly of their rockets, and with a 100 kilo bomb you had to score a pretty close hit on the target, and so they tended to use the 23mm cannons as their weapon of choice for taking out ground targets, because they could get so much more accuracy with the cannons than they could with any of the other weapons on the aircraft. The rockets that they carried were more than capable of defeating the armour of a Panther or a Tiger, but first they had to actually hit the bloody things, and they were so incredibly inaccurate. Also, you have to bear in mind that the weapon load that I'm carrying here of 8 132mm rockets and 4 100 kilo rockets is actually double the typical combat load that a Sturmovik would carry. They would normally only carry 4 of these 132mm rockets, and they very rarely carried 100 kilo bombs. They usually carried 50 kilo bombs. So you can imagine how accurate they needed to be to knock out a Tiger with a 50 kilo bomb. The bomb and rocket armament of the Sturmovik was actually particularly effective against unprotected targets like convoys of trucks or horses, or used against large area targets like railway yards. But for taking out tanks, Sturmovik pilots tended to use the cannons. Or if they did insist on using the bombs and rockets, they tended to just scare the tank crews rather than actually kill them. I am now almost out of, well, I'm out of bombs and rockets, and I don't have an awful lot of cannon ammunition left. I've got enough to defend myself on the way home, but I am definitely getting the hell out of here. I'm going to head back and rearm, and hopefully not do a Jingles landing. Having a look around, seeing what we've got. A fella up there in a BF-109. Now, there's a P-40, actually there are 2 P-40s on him, and I'm thinking about going over and getting stuck in, but even though I am substantially lighter without my bomb and rocket load. This thing is not a fighter. So screw that, check the map. Which way is the airbase? There, follow that PE2. He's returning to base to rearm as well, so I'm going to keep an eye on this fella in the BF-109. I should be safe from him, he's got two P-40s engaging him. Keep this thing low and head back to base. There's no guarantee that he isn't going to come after me, but I can make it less worth his time. He's going to have to sacrifice an awful lot of altitude in order to take me out. And there are two P-40s behind him, so there's another BF-109 over there, but he's over 7 kilometers away. And I'm going to head for the safety of my airfield and its anti-aircraft guns cover me while I'm rearming. The major threat to the Sturmovik on the Eastern Front, because it flew at such low altitude, wasn't really the Luftwaffe. It was 20mm, 37mm and the dreaded 88mm anti-aircraft guns. But thanks to the rugged construction of the aircraft and the heavy armour that enclosed the engine and the cockpit and the canopy, this thing was far from easy to shoot down. Unlike one of those two P-40s, that BF-109 pilot, Bombice, that fella back there, he did have two P-40s on him. He's managed to shoot one of them down. He's doing pretty well. But shooting down a Sturmovik was not an easy proposition. There's one recorded instance of a Sturmovik that managed to successfully return to base and land after having taken more than 600 hits. Now, records don't state whether or not the Sturmovik was capable of taking off again afterwards, and most of those hits were almost certainly rifle caliber ammunition, but that's still pretty damn impressive. And while I'm flying back, check this out. There you go. 2 on 1, two P-40s against one BF-109. The BF-109 shot them both down. So yeah, I think choosing to not go after that guy was a very, very wise decision. He has done extremely well. But back to the Sturmovik. It's very, very difficult to over-exaggerate just how important the Sturmovik was considered to the Russian war effort during the Second World War. Soviet resistance throughout the summer of 1941 didn't do an awful lot to slow the German advance down. I mean, this is a matter of historical record. And it was obvious that the aircraft factories around Moscow and other centres in Western Russia were at great risk, and so the monumental undertaking of dismantling all those factories and shipping them east beyond the Ural Mountains was undertaken. Within a couple of months, production was back online. However, I find this incredibly, grimly amusing. Production was slow to get started. Two plant managers, Shankman and Tretyakov, were encouraged to do better by a telegram from Stalin, which read, "You have let down our country and our Red Army. You have not manufactured IL-2s until now. The IL-2 aircraft are necessary for our Red Army now, like air, like bread. Shankman produces one IL-2 a day, and Tretyakov builds 1 or 2 MiG-3s daily. It is a mockery of our country and the Red Army. I ask you not to try the government's patience and demand that you manufacture more IL-2s. I warn you for the last time. Stalin." Unsurprisingly, with cheerful encouragement like that, production ramped up very, very quickly. Meanwhile, I'm trying to land this thing, and I have no idea what the stall speed of a Sturmovik is, and I think I managed to figure out that as long as I keep it above 170 kilometers per hour, I should be good. And that was a pretty good landing. Damn, I'm getting good. No Jingles landings for you today. Sorry, better luck next time. Or perhaps later on in this video. Spoiler alert. I'm not entirely sure what that P-39 pilot was doing. He buzzed me as I came in on my landing approach. It's possible that he recognised me and thought, I'm going to get myself on YouTube. Hey. Congratulations, you got yourself on YouTube. Let's get this thing rearmed. Don't need to do any repairs, it didn't take any damage. And then get it back in the air and get this battle won. Of course, I'm flying an IL-2M here, and the original IL-2, well, it wasn't really that good. From a mechanical point of view, it worked pretty much as advertised, unlike a lot of Soviet aircraft of the same time frame that were death traps, and they just killed pilots, thrown up into the air, even though the aircraft didn't actually work. And while they were being used in combat, the engineers were fixing what was wrong with them down on the ground. The Sturmovik, the original IL-2, you know, it worked, but the 20mm main cannon just didn't have enough killing power, and it was very vulnerable to fighter attacks from above and behind when it was in low altitude combat. A number of improvements were incorporated which resulted in this aircraft, the IL-2M. The two 20mm Shevak cannon were replaced with a very high velocity 23mm cannon. They gave it an upgraded AM38F engine which had 750 horsepower. And the cockpit was lengthened to accommodate a gunner who had a single 12.7mm UBT machine gun at the back of the cockpit, so he could fire upward and backward and protect the aircraft where it was most vulnerable at attacks from fighters coming in from above and behind. The armour was increased from 700 kilos of armour to 950 kilos of armour. That's 2,100 pounds of armour. Armour alone. Never mind the weapon load. It was a very, very heavy aircraft. But the Soviet engineers did a fantastic job. Despite the heavier armour, performance hardly suffered. The longer cockpit actually improved the machine's aerodynamics, and a slightly improved AM38F engine provided even more horsepower. Structural changes trimmed the weight of other parts of the aircraft, resulting in a net gain of only 100 kilograms or 220 pounds. With the aircraft's major defects now corrected, the Sturmovik really came into its own as a ground attack aircraft. But more on that in a moment. For now, what I'm trying to do is figure out where's the best place for me to attack. The P2, who landed ahead of me and took off ahead of me, is gone back to the same spot that we were both attacking earlier. So he's liable to have been spotted, and that's where we were both last seen. So I don't really want to head over in the direction where the enemy fighters are likely to be. One of them has just taken out artillery. So I check the map, and oh crap. I think I'm flying right towards him. Despite my best efforts, I think I'm actually putting myself right. There we go, there's the artillery. There is a BF-109 up there in front of me somewhere. So despite my best efforts of trying to avoid where they're likely to be, it looks like I'm actually flying right into him. Having a look around for some backup. I do have some support. Okay, so this isn't actually too bad, and yep, there he is. Now, here's the thing. The sensible thing to do here would be to turn this thing around and drag this guy underneath the two fighters who are above me. Put him into a position where they can attack him from above and behind. But that wouldn't be any fun, would it? The Sturmovik is a very, very heavily armoured aircraft, and I have two 23mm cannons. BF-109 doesn't have so much in the way of armour. So this is a risk, and I did take a hit, but it was totally worth it. As soon as that guy committed to 3-on-1 combat, he was doomed, and I think he probably knew it, but he almost certainly just thought to himself, well, screw it, at least I'll take one of them with me. Unfortunately, the one that he picked was the Sturmovik. Bad choice. I didn't escape scot-free though. He very nearly took my wing off, and my engine is smoking. So I'm going to return to base, I'm going to get rid of my bombs, fire my rockets off, lighten the load, turn this thing around, and try to put it down intact. It's likely that he was aiming for the wing on purpose. He was a fairly good player. He's managed to get a couple of kills, and the armour on the Sturmovik is all around the engine and the cockpit, so aiming for centre of mass in a head-on with one of these things is not the best option. It's likely he was trying to shoot my wing off, and he very, very nearly did it, so well done to him. But I'm out of this one from here on in. We've still got 3 pilots up, and they only have 1 left. But the one that they have left is the guy who went 2-on-1 against 2 P-40s and shot them both down, so we could still lose this. But I'm out of it. I'm going to RTB. I'm not even sure I can make it back in one piece. I have to cut power to the throttle because my engine's smoking. I don't want my engine to seize up, and the reduced airflow... Oh, there's the other guy. Keep an eye on him, see if the team managed to take him down before I manage to get back. But the reduced airflow... There we go! The control surfaces on that left wing are so badly shot up, it's generating almost no lift. You can see the way the aircraft keeps trying to roll over to the left because there's more lift coming onto the right wing than the left wing. And the damage to the throttle, even with reducing the weight by dropping my bomb and rocket load, I can't afford to run this thing at full throttle or my engine's going to seize up. So it's by no means guaranteed that I'm actually going to make it back to the airfield. So I'm sitting here hoping that the rest of my team are going to take that last German pilot down before I crash. I can't gain any kind of altitude here and just cruise back in. I have to rely on nursing the throttle and using the ailerons to try to keep this thing level. So please shoot that guy down. Pretty please. With a cherry on top. If you have a poke around on Wikipedia for information about the IL-2, there are some amazing stories about some of the pilots. One of them, whose name is only given as T. Kuznetsov, is a hero of the Soviet Union, was shot down. Managed to escape the wreck of the aircraft and hid nearby. One of the Bf-109s that shot him down then landed, and the pilot got out and went to poke around the wreckage. Whether he was trying to find the pilot and help him or was just looking for souvenirs, nobody knows. But Kuznetsov didn't waste any time, jumped out of the bushes, straight into the Bf-109, stole it, and flew it back to Soviet lines, narrowly avoiding being shot down by his own fighter aircraft on the way. In other news, the last remaining German pilot has just been critted by our Yak. He's down, but he's not out. Please kill him. I really don't fancy my chances of landing this thing successfully, not in this condition. I'm amazed I haven't fallen out of the sky yet. Come on. Come on, Captain Balu, you can do it. Yes, he's got him. Fantastic, good stuff. Now, if the game would just end while this thing's still in the air, that would be fantastic. Because I really doubt my ability to put this thing on... I mean, look at this. It's practically impossible to keep it in level flight. I'm going to have a go, though. Hostile team has lost all its vehicles. Oh. Am I going to make it? Am I not going to make it? Well, it turns out I'd forgotten about keeping the speed of the Sturmovik up above 170 kilometers per hour. I'm not going to make it. It was inevitable, though, wasn't it? And right as we win the bloody game as well. Typical. Well, it wouldn't be a Jingles replay if I didn't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory right at the end. That's what I do. But yeah, not a bad result. Certainly better than I've ever done in a realistic battle in a ground attack aircraft before. A bunch of ground kills, and I managed to sneak an air kill in there at the end. So that was the IL-2M Sturmovik, and I think I'll leave you with a quote from an engineer who had this to say about the aircraft. The Sturmovik was elegant, superbly designed in a direct and efficient fashion for its task, but for that same reason, it was crude in the same sense that a sledgehammer is crude. It had no adornments and was dedicated to its function without regard for aesthetics. While dogfighters are the glory boys of combat aviation, purpose-built mud fighters like the IL-2, the A-1 Sky Raider, or the A-10 Warthog are no bullshit weapons, and they look the part. As always, folks, watch your six, and I'll catch you next time.